Hey, Chris Holder here from AV Technology. I'm here with Chris Johnson, Director of Oceania for RIEDEL, and he's playing the role of crash test dummy for our first in a series of podcasts for the Integrate Expo show. So the reason for tapping RIEDEL is an acknowledgement that broadcast is playing a much larger role at the Integrate show. And I thought, well, RIEDEL is definitely one of those companies that has straddled the world of AV and broadcast for some time. So yeah, I just wanted to touch base with you, Chris, and have a conversation about those worlds, how they've collided, and whether we can learn anything from that. So my first question to you is, what does RIEDEL consider itself to be? Is RIEDEL an AV company or is RIEDEL a broadcast company?
That's a good question. I think the answer is probably yes. I think we're really both. It's actually been the case for a while that around about half of our business is in media and the other half is outside, whether that be in corporate and government, education, or whether it's in sports or live events. I think we've always had a pretty big footprint across lots of different sides of the industry. You know, when I think about some of the products that we're most known for, like Bolero, for example, we see those devices used all over the industry, whether it's in motorsport, obviously we just had the Formula One in Melbourne, whether it's in live events, in music touring, or of course, whether it's in, you know, traditional broadcast workflows on an OB or on a studio floor.
Indeed. So let me ask you, I guess, about what's driving this blurring of the lines from a technological perspective. Like, the obvious one is everything getting onto the network. Would that be sort of the culprit number one?
Yeah, look, I think there's a few different technological changes that have happened both on the broadcast side and on the AV side that have naturally brought these things closer together. Definitely the move towards IP, the move towards more conventional IT systems, networks, COTS, servers, and etc. That's absolutely brought the worlds closer together. I think it's also true that the broadcast world has been embracing a whole bunch of control and automation workflows, which is also something that people in AV are really interested in. And of course, we've seen this big shift, especially since COVID, towards doing things more remotely, whether that's remote production to save cost, whether it's about trying to control things remotely or do different types of events. We've definitely seen a lot of ways in which technology has made AV look a bit more like broadcast and indeed brought some AV elements into more traditional broadcast workflows.
So what are some of those kind of non-traditional verticals that maybe didn't have much of a broadcast focus? Can you kind of maybe name a few of those little niches that have just really, really stepped up their game when it comes to broadcast, and maybe how?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think, this is happening all across different verticals. So if I think about sports, for example, you have your traditional sports broadcasts done in the normal way. We're watching a game at a stadium and that's on our televisions, and that all looks like it always did. But alongside that now, there's increasingly kind of second screen content, other fan content that's being made around the sport, which is maybe taking a bit more of a non-traditional broadcast approach. If I think about some of the live events we do, there's plenty of events we work on that once upon a time were purely live and now have a big baked-in broadcast component. And some of that comes from COVID, when, of course, those events had to go virtual. And what we saw, and maybe a good example, is something like a big corporate event, like a Salesforce World Tour or something like that. During COVID, they had to go virtual. And then when they were able to come back to a live event, they actually kept both parts. So now it's a broadcast event and it's a live event. And then I think the other interesting example is other corporate customers who are now looking to AV tools like Teams that we're talking on now, or Zoom, or whatever it might be, as more of a broadcast tool to communicate with their staff or stakeholders or customers. And a lot of those customers are actually building little broadcast studios now inside those kind of corporate environments, and then we see those worlds coming together.
So just to use, say, Salesforce and their global event as an example, like you've been very restrained up to this point and not mentioned any of your gear, maybe except Bolero very briefly. But so how does, I guess, RIEDEL's offering connect those worlds and reduce any friction when it comes to, say, Salesforce doing what it needs to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, intercoms may be the easy part because, of course, it's pretty easy for everyone to understand that no matter what kind of live workflow you're in, whether you're producing television or an event or doing a sport, you need to be able to talk to each other. And so it's, I think, conceptually easy to see how those things come together. But I'd say that the thing that we've done that's really enabled some of these hybrid solutions is more around the signal distribution side of things. So for us, that means MediaNet. And if I think about a big live event like the Salesforce event or similar, what we're essentially doing there is putting in a signal distribution system that allows people to move any signal anywhere. And that is, of course, very useful for putting on the live event itself because we've got screens all over the place that need to get video feeds, whether it be PowerPoint presentations or cameras or whatever. But it then also allows, by virtue of those things all being on one network, all of that content to then be available immediately for use in something else, like a broadcast. And so that makes these types of workflows more accessible because you don't have to build two systems and somehow integrate them. You have an all-in-one, if you like, signal distribution platform that can serve both sides of the project.
And you also mentioned earlier remote production, which seems to me to be a really big sort of game changer. And in some ways, a bit of a secret weapon for some people who are doing a lot of remote production and in a really effective manner. And I guess that's sort of a function of improvements in sort of cloud services. And again, this all feels like it's come out of COVID as well. Do you want to just sort of describe, I guess, your take on this from a RIEDEL perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely see this kind of big concept of remote production being a lot more useful now than it ever was, and a lot more demanded. I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. Of course, COVID necessitated a load of this stuff, and then it stuck. But also there are customers out there who are looking to maybe save costs by saving on travel. Or maybe there are customers out there looking to do a production that they couldn't otherwise do because they can't bring those resources together. We also see, I think, the need to use remote production as a tool to bring other things to an event that wouldn't otherwise be there. So, for example, the ability to have a corporate event where you can have a group of people in one city and a group of people in another, and they can share the same experience. Remote production enables that. If I think about some of the sport workflows that we're dealing with now, with our Simply Live platform, we're working on a lot of, VAR, so remote officiating workflows in sport, and they're all built around this idea that we might want to have a venue somewhere separate to the match with a bunch of senior officials in who can add value to the sport through the officiating, and of course they need remote production elements. Moving video and audio between sites to enable those things. So it's become, I think, a toolbox, if you like, that can be applied to a whole number of different situations. And as you say, absolutely enabled by the ability for a lot of these solutions now to work in the cloud, whether that's, in the pure sense of the word, like a public cloud, or whether it's just the fact that there's a data center somewhere with a whole bunch of equipment in that isn't where the event's taking place. All of these things, I think, are part of the same story and enable people to produce content in a way they couldn't before.
Now, I guess with this blurring of the lines between broadcast and AV, is it as simplistic to say that AV is, I guess, eating the traditional broadcast lunch, or is or is broadcast getting something out of this too, like traditional broadcast?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the truth is that there's always been some overlap, right? So I think it's always been the case that, of course, traditional AV technology existed in the broadcast world. I mean, you go to a big broadcaster and guess what? They've got video conferencing rooms too. But I think the change that's happened is that these technologies are now part of the same workflows. So that's the difference. So, whereas before I might have to do, remote news gathering, for example, I might have actually had to send a van out into the field and it's got some uplink capability and it's got a little crew in it and a reporter and a big camera. Nowadays, with the virtue of my smartphone and a Teams or Zoom call, I can suddenly be a remote contributor to a news broadcast. And that's just enabled by the fact that now we see these kind of video conferencing AV workflows making their way into broadcast. So I think broadcast definitely gets something out of it too. I mean, as technology vendors in the broadcast space, of course, we get something out of it when the AV world embraces some of this technology. Although it's definitely the case that, changes in where people get their content, how they consume their content, have definitely, created challenges for conventional, traditional media outlets.
And it's been democratized in, I guess, every facet. So whether it's the consumer getting what they want when they want on non-traditional platforms, but it's also the content creators not needing to have, like you said, $1 million remote news gathering van. They can do that from their device. I guess, so does RIEDEL embrace that, or you have no choice but to embrace it, but how's it impacting on RIEDEL if it is at all?
Oh, look, it definitely impacts. I think now as we're creating new technologies, our newer product lines absolutely have this baked in from the beginning. And of course, our traditional product lines are evolving in this direction. So, in communications, we obviously launched our new virtual smart panel application at IBC last year. And that's all about how do we create some of the, complementary intercom workflow to what people are used to on a nice hardware panel and a nice control room in a conventional kind of broadcast environment. How do we bring some of that capability to someone who's running around with a smartphone or a tablet or on a web browser? That's part of it. I think on the video side, the whole Simply Live product suite is kind of built with this in mind. That was really a product that was built from the ground up for that remote production world, where maybe the kind of traditional large format, hardware heavy broadcast technology approach didn't work anymore. So I think it's both. I think we definitely embrace what remote production is able to bring to the events and the customers we work on. And it's also true that our customers are pushing us more and more to develop technologies that suit that way of working. And so we, like any vendor, have to be on the front foot.
And I guess to wind up, we'll be seeing you and RIEDEL at the Integrate Expo at the end of August in Sydney. Just, I guess, interested in your personal perspective on the larger presence of the broadcast players there. And you've been exhibiting there for some time. I guess a couple of things, I guess. Have you noticed like some of the conversations that you've had, I guess, changing, or maybe the type of people, the roles they have changing, who are having those conversations with you? And I guess also seeing more competition, I suppose, from maybe those in a more traditional broadcast space.
Yeah, look, I think it's only a good thing. I mean, it's always been, I guess, the case for us that, with about half of our customer base being outside of media and half in, maybe always felt a little bit split, right? That we might have a trade show that suits one half and a trade show that suits another half, but increasingly we're telling the same stories to both groups of people. So I think the convergence is good. I also would say that, back to our conversation before about some of these traditional AV customers actually building broadcast workflows into their facilities, that ultimately means that there's a head of technology there at one of our customers who's now responsible for both things. And so it doesn't make sense for them to go to two trade shows to answer the same set of questions. So I think it's great. We certainly welcome more broadcast involvement in the show. I think ultimately our customers love it when they can go to one show and tick a lot of boxes and see a lot of vendors across a broad kind of scope of technology. So yeah, we're looking forward to it, and it should be a great show.
Great. Well, looking forward to seeing you then, Chris.
Thanks very much.